Dr. Roberts, welcome.
Dr. Price, thank you. It's so good to be on with you today. Today is a special day indeed.
Yes, do you have your copy of Dangerous Indifference yet?
I do actually. This copy has been with me throughout the day. Every place that I go, I cannot seem to put it down. I'm reading and rereading and touching on different points. It's such a rich read, if you may. Yes,
I think this is one of our best pieces of work yet.
I agree. I agree 100%. I think it's the kind of work that transcends any one area, any one professional pursuit, anyone with any, with a single lived experience. It's really good work, if I may say so.
Yeah, so if you would please, I think the culturally responsive leadership work is the work you started. So if you don't mind, I'd love for you to just kind of talk about how did you come to call it culturally responsive leadership and how did that become a focus?
Yeah, absolutely. Cultural responsive leadership. And so when I think about the genesis or the origin of this work, it's having looked at years and years of a struggle and challenge that many leaders particularly in the K-12 education environment, but I've come to learn that leaders in very different spaces, in Fortune 500 companies, in the military, in healthcare, realizing that in many instances, one of the gaps that existed that prevented people from optimizing who they were in their roles is that they were not as conversant or familiar with the cultural or lived experiences of others. And so I saw that there was a need for us to think about um, cultural responsiveness in a way that provides tools to individuals who needed that.
Yeah, and so when I think about the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is what most people are talking about these days, what stands out to me about culturally responsive leadership is that this is not charity. You know, diversity, sometimes people can think about it in terms of like, okay, so we need to make sure that we have some difference present in our organizations, and we're doing so to kind of help underrepresented groups, or we're going to be inclusive because we think it's the morally right thing to do. And
Right.
culturally responsive leadership, what you've helped me to see, is really about hardly any of that. It is a focus on understanding that if we elevate the lived experiences of everyone on our team, it makes us smarter.
It is. It is. I often think about we most of us have a thorough understanding of the word culture, right? We think of cultural experiences, cultural norms, but one of the key pieces in this sort of phrase is the fact that responsiveness comes from the Latin word responsivus, right, which means answering. And cultural responsiveness is really about answering the call to get to this place of awareness of not only your own cultural and lived experiences, but the cultural and lived experiences and identity of other individuals and being willing to elevate those.
Yeah. So we don't have a whole lot of time with folks. And Damar, if you would please click like, click share, because I know you have a lot of people who listen to you sing out here in the world. I want to talk about the Daniel story. So Daniel was a 5-year-old.
Daniel was a 5-year old, right? And that story is shared on page 109 in the book. Yeah, Daniel was a 5-year old. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so I'll share a few details.
Yes.
So this is 2019. You get a text message, and the message basically contains photos and videos of a Black 5-year-old kindergarten boy. And you're in Los Angeles, and there's two white male police officers standing next to Daniel.
Yes.
And what made this so egregious is that he was in handcuffs.
I did not even know, Dr. Price, that they made handcuffs that small for a 5-year old.
Yeah, it's pretty concerning. So
Yeah.
can you tell us about what you did when you noticed that Daniel was in handcuffs, and what was your next course of action? Because you were on the administrative team there.
I was on the administrative team. As a matter of fact, I was a senior leader. I was in the executive team, right? One would say that I was one of the top three decision makers in this large organization serving almost 20,000 students. Um, but my immediate response, once I received this text message of a photograph of this 5-year-old black boy standing, being hovered over by two white male police officers, both of whom are, way over 6 feet tall. I asked myself why and how. Why is this happening, and how could this have happened? And so immediately I made some calls because I wanted to be in a place whereby I'm informed before jumping to any conclusions. And what was shared with me once I inquired about what occurred is that Daniel, in his kindergarten class, uh, was having a challenging time because the teacher did not want to give him a toy that he had brought to school.
So all of this is about a toy.
All of this is about a toy, and that's what I want our listeners and our eventual readers to understand. This started because here's a 5-year-old boy who is acting like a 5-year-old boy who is not having his way because of a toy. And instead, this behavior was characterized in so many ways with a lot of sort of deficit language. He had a meltdown. He was not responsive. He was defiant. He was belligerent. He was violating the school rules. This is a 5-year-old boy. And so the response to him, instead of finding an adult in the building with whom he has a relationship, or utilizing another strategy, we've equipped teachers and our related service providers with lots of strategies to address young people when they're escalating. It was shared with me that the school's administration said he is not complying. Call 911.
So let me just make sure I get this straight. And we detail the this story
Yeah.
in the new book, Dangerous Indifference, a case for culturally responsive leadership. We share information about lots of different cultures, but this particular story is about a little black 5-year-old boy who ends up in handcuffs because he brought a toy to school and basically had a temper tantrum because he couldn't have it.
That is correct. That is correct.
And people in dominant cultures, children
Yes,
have temper tantrums when they can't have their toys.
that's correct, right? That's what 5-year-olds do, regardless of their cultural experiences. They have tantrums. They want to have things their way, especially around toys. So yes,
What I think is most concerning to me about this story is clearly all the things that happened to Daniel. And when you sent out a communication afterwards to say, okay, we're not in the spirit of firing anybody. We want to make sure that Daniel's social emotional health is intact.
yes,
But we want to make sure that this never happens again. We don't want any child in elementary school ending up in handcuffs, let alone a 5-year-old. What happened when you sent out that communication?
so you're absolutely right. That is exactly where I was. Once I got more than enough information, I decided that my immediate next step was to make sure that this was not ever going to reoccur again for any young person, any student, any kindergartner, anyone in K through 12 education within this organization, but certainly not a black or brown student. And so I crafted a communication grounded it in evidence, used a lot of the guidance from the U.S. Department of Education around the disproportionate outcomes of black and brown students having encounters with law enforcement. I wanted to make sure that my communication was not based on a single data point, but a multifactorial approach. So I sent the communication organization wide, and in my role as an executive on this leadership team, the communication essentially stated that with immediate effect, law enforcement should not be called to our schools to address student discipline issues or incidents that can be addressed by teachers, related service providers, but more importantly, by school administration. Right? So
Mm-hmm.
there are instances where you may want to have law enforcement, and we know what those extremes are, but
Do
not
we? Like, what are the extremes where you would call law enforcement on a child in school? Because I think people need to be able to contrast
Certainly.
and understand that to call 911 on a 5-year-old who's having a tantrum because he can't have his toy, they need to understand how egregious that is. So, what kinds of situation would we call 911 for in a school?
Let's juxtapose that with information that a student has possession of a firearm in a school. You call 911. You do not respond. We've seen more than 60 school or school related shootings this year in this country, right? And so, yes, so that's an example where you call 911. There's a serious assault where a weapon is involved, especially on an adult or not a student. You call 911. You don't call 911 for a 5-year-old with a toy. And so immediately I send this communication out, providing this data and sharing with the entire organization. You should not call 911. If you have to call 911, a decision should be made where there's collaboration between two or more adults in a decision making capacity. What does this mean? An administrator should always be involved in the decision making process, right? Because you want to have a thought partner if you're going to make this decision, a decision that is likely to impact a young person's life for a very long time.
Yeah. So here's where the dangerous indifference comes in.
Yes.
You send out that communication, and immediately you hear from your immediate supervisor, and she's a woman of color.
Yep.
She's not black, but she's a woman of color, and her first inclination is to tell you that you embarrassed the principal.
Essentially, uh, uh, this was an individual who called an emergency meeting, and you want to call an emergency meeting when there is something that is mission critical. And so,
Mm-hmm.
emergency meeting was called where there were probably 5 or 6 executives attending the meeting. And the very first question that came up, I'll tell you, Dr. Price, and this certainly sits on top for me to this day. Within the first 7 to 10 minutes of the conversation, no one asked how was Danielle doing and what happened to Danielle. What
So
I
we weren't concerned about Daniel at all.
Not in this moment. That was not on
So
the radar.
so in the first 10 minutes, what kinds of things did come up?
The focus in the first 10 minutes from these senior leaders was: did you talk with the principal? How's
Mm.
the principal doing? Did you get the principal's input before you sent out this email changing the policy stating that no teacher or school leader should call 911? How is this going to impact the principal in their leadership?
So if I may ask, what were some of the cultural identities of the principal?
Yeah, and so the cultural identity of the principal at the time: white male, leading a school that was probably about 90% Black and Latinx students, um, probably a really good balance of Latinx, African American, and white teachers and staff. Um, but again, um,
What about in leadership? How many black people were in leadership?
at this school,
Yeah. Or well, in the district. Let's just talk district wide.
oh, in the organization, there was a paucity of Black leaders. There were very few Black leaders, and one of the expected outcomes from my role was to not only to recruit, but to retain and develop the few Black leaders who were in the organization.
Hmm.
And so after sending out this communication, I have to tell you the written communication. So while I'm on the phone and I'm having this conversation with the leader of the organization, and some others who are so focused on how is this email, this communication going to impact the principal, I'm receiving dozens of email responses from teachers and leaders in the organization saying, thank you. This is a long time coming. We have been in this organization for 5, 10, and 15 years, and this needed to have happened because we've seen how the treatment of historically marginalized students and adults never received a response to interrupt or disrupt this unhealthy or harmful status quo.
One of the reasons why I think this is our best book yet is because while you're getting messages privately saying thank you very much,
Yes.
there are several, probably hundreds of people who are not saying anything at all. They are not moved at all about what happened to Daniel. You know, one of the reasons why I think people should purchase it is because we keep having these types of experiences.
Yes.
Like we keep having these cultural, insensitive, culturally damaging environments, and people keep doing the same things over and over again. And we have kind of laid out a plan here to help people not continue to step on all over ourselves and making these cultural faux pas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly echo your sentiment that it's one of our better books because not only are we laying out stories and experiences that will resonate with a lot of people, but we have provided a lot of tools that people can add to their repertoire, right? Whether you work in the K-12 environment in a school or you work for a Fortune 500 company, you are likely to experience this dangerous indifference that we talk about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, danger being very harmful or hurtful, and the indifference being just the lack of concern or empathy or sympathy that people don't want to show. Everyone experiences that from the moment they step foot outside of their doors every day.
Yeah, and so what inspired this book was what happened with George Floyd. The nation was sparked into a level of consciousness, at least some people were, and immediately we're like, you know, what can we do? And yet, on the ground,
Yes.
as the work continued, people were still making decisions around those typically left out and left behind that were very, very dangerous. And so, what we have done here, and what I'm very, very proud of, is laid out our case for why this is not necessarily. Is it morally wrong to put a 5-year-old in handcuffs? I would argue yes. However, as we start to think about the negative implications for all of us when 5-year-olds are placed in handcuffs,
Yes.
that is where we start to move the needle and start to show up in more culturally proficient ways. So, why do you think people should purchase this book in this last few moments we have together here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a litany of reasons why they should purchase the book, but I think the most important or salient reasons why they should is it reminds individuals about our current reality, and that is um, we are not taking the time. Too many people are in positions of guidance, inspiration, and leadership, and they're not taking the time to not only examine their own lived experiences, their own cultural identities, but they are not taking time to try to understand the differences that exist in terms of other people's lived experiences and to try to make space to elevate those lived experiences, right? There's difference that we will encounter every single day. And this book, I believe that after reading it, looking at the stories and the anecdotes that we've shared, as well as the number of tools that we've provided, um, individuals will be much more enlightened for having read this book, right? We talked a lot about the continuum that is in the book. And it's a continuum that allows you to self identify where you are in this continuum of being culturally destructive or culturally proficient. And we said that we want people to move towards what?
More cultural proficiency.
Cultural proficiency. Thank you.
Yeah. Just today I had a situation where a bus driver got fired because she was trying to get students to stop using a racial pejorative.
Yes.
But she got fired because in that communication, she used the pejorative. And it's like, we keep firing teachers and staff. We keep firing or terminating kiddos. And that is not going to get us to where we need to be. So I'm grateful that we've got another product out there. Thank you so much for your time on this beautiful, beautiful book. Folks can purchase their copy, either a hardcover or a soft cover, on Amazon, or you can always go to livelyparadox.com to pick up your copy of Dangerous Indifference. Again, believe that this is our best piece of work yet. Thank you so much, Doc.
Thank you, Dr. Price. It's good to be on with you today. Cultural proficiency is important. Dangerous indifference. The case for cultural responsive leadership.
Thank you, sir.